Hey everybody, it's Mike Jefferson, ChicagoJazz.com, Chicago Jazz Magazine, and welcome to Talkin' Jazz. Another episode here at the beautiful Johnny O's on 35th and Morgan. We are going to be previewing the Chicago Jazz Orchestra's performance coming up May 18th for their 40th anniversary, because I have legendary drummer, the extraordinary drummer, Joel Spencer is here. Joel, you made it down here to Bridgeport in one piece. Are you impressed?
I'm impressed and I feel good. I feel good now that we're here.
It's not scary outside. Come on, man.
No,
It's
not at
Johnny
all.
O's,
No,
man.
it's
It's
Johnny
Johnny
O's.
O's.
I'm feeling comfortable. I'm feeling good.
Well, I wanted to have you on because we're going to do a feature interview with Joel. It's going to come out sometime in the fall, so we're not going to delve way into all of Joel's stuff because you and I could talk for like 3 hours about
We could.
all of the history, everything, all of the experiences, everybody you've played with. I do want to touch on some of that, but why don't we focus first off right on the front end about the Chicago Jazz Orchestra and the 40th anniversary show that's coming up, because Joel was one of the original members of the Jazz Members Big Band, which turned into the Chicago Jazz Orchestra. Am I right?
Yes, indeed.
So how did you guys, because I know this is a kind of an interesting story, because you guys were just getting together to read charts, right? And just kind of play, or how did this whole thing come about?
Well, eventually, I think it started out somewhat of a rehearsal band. However, there was a core membership, and those were basically all of our close friends that went to University of Illinois in Champaign-Urbana.
And that university back then was like packed with like top players, right? I mean, that
There
was
were-
just smoking bands down
There were great players, and that there were a number of us that decided we'd move to Chicago. But I think with that move, we planned on starting a band.
Oh, okay.
So the Jazz, what would be the Jazz Members Band, which was named by Rick Bendel, the late Rick Bendel, the trumpet player, came up with the Jazz Members Big Band. I still love that name.
That's a great name.
It is a great name. The core people of the U of I band, we settled and moved up to Chicago, and we would start another band. And we started at Shuba's on Southport.
Oh, really?
And we started playing there once a week for, obviously whoever would come in and listen. And we were a serious band, though. It's a band that rehearsed from the beginning, doing difficult, challenging charts, and, to feature people who are talented as soloists. And so that's how the band started.
Who was in the core back then? Who was like the core members that were always showing up?
Well, that would be Ed Peterson on tenor, Eric Schneider on alto was a part of that. If you look through that saxophone section. Also, Brad Wheeler, a younger player, would play with the band now and then, was from Champaign. Also, in the trombone section, Jeff Lindbergh, who's now the leader of Chicago Jazz Orchestra. And I'm trying to think, Scott Bentall, another Champaign player, was in the band. And in the trumpet section, there was Mark Curry playing lead. There was Art Davis playing the solo chair. Steve Jensen playing solo chair and co-leader. And then the rhythm section, Dan DiLorenzo on bass eventually. It took maybe a while, or maybe Dan did start at the beginning, myself on drums, and John Campbell on piano.
It's kind of a killing band.
It was a wonderful band. We had a great time playing. Everybody, we were together because we wanted to be together. We wanted to play.
So, just thinking back now, what happens these days, and you're trying to get a band that size together and just to rehearse or to play a gig, there's no money with that amount of people. How did you guys convince each other to say, hey man, this is important to us, let's get together, let's do this stuff? Was it just because you guys wanted to play challenging tunes and you knew in order to keep your chops up and keep all your stuff happening so that you could play all these other gigs, this was something that you wanted to devote your time to doing once a week? Or, what was the thought process?
Yeah, one advantage we had was we were all very young. And so we moved to Chicago, and what could be better than we would get together, rehearse, really put some great music together, and to play and to become known. To become known as, having a great band, and we really did that. Mm-hmm. That's what did happen, but we came out of a background, everyone wanted to be a musician from a very early age. We all met up at University of Illinois, and playing music was more than, this is going to be great fun, this is going to be interesting. It's who you are. It's in many ways, it's a matter of survival. Survival in that being yourself. How can you be happy in this world if you're not, in our case, playing music together?
Yeah.
It was a very positive situation, and my best memories is that everyone really admired the next person's playing. It was a band that for so long, I thought, got along really well, shared a lot of the same values. A lot of great things came out of it. And we became known as a band, and individuals became known as soloist, up-and-coming musicians.
And you guys had a showcase once a week for all of it, pretty much, right? If
Yes.
you're at Shuba's, like once a week, it's
Right.
amazing.
We went to Shuba's, and then eventually we'd be playing at a restaurant club called George's. Eventually, the Jazz Showcase on Rush Street.
Yeah.
And eventually, the Jazz Festival.
Yeah.
So, I mean, there were a lot of things to look forward to, but there were great times. It was fun starting out in the beginning and working ourselves through that and having those successes.
So now knowing a lot of you guys, I'm sure that you guys would play. Was there a little bit of hanging out afterwards, maybe? And
Oh, maybe.
but that was a big part of the whole thing because you guys would play and then you guys would hang out and talk about the music, probably.
Oh,
And,
absolutely.
you know,
I mean, playing music was it was our social existence. I mean, playing music and hanging out together, what could be better than hanging out with musicians, talk about music, talk about what we were doing, but talk about music in general
Yeah.
and what we were being inspired by. So there was always the talk of, where we wanted to go, what the direction could be, how things could be better. And I always thought everybody was constantly learning, but everyone was very motivated and inspired by this atmosphere.
That's the key.
That's it.
That's the key because
Absolutely.
Joel's a professor down at the University of Illinois, and the kids have to show up to big band, have to show up to different classes, have to do different things. But I mean, when you're not in a collegiate setting like that, an academic setting like that, it's really exactly like being a musician is being an entrepreneur. You're in business for yourself.
Oh, absolutely.
So, I mean, what you're talking about is these guys, you in particular as well, I mean, you guys knew, hey, man, this is just what we love, but we've got to keep doing this because we're honing our craft in the process.
We are,
So making a
and
sacrifice.
absolutely. No, that's a great way of describing it. Fact is, that's exactly where we wanted to be. This is exactly what we wanted to do. It was very much about, wow, the freedom to do and be what you would like to become.
Yeah.
I mean, that was a big part of this. So playing music for me, since I started at 9 years old, has always been a goal. But it was something throughout the school year, in the summer as a kid, eventually junior high, high school. So I did this all year round. I couldn't imagine not doing this. And guess what? I found a lot of other people that shared the same interest. And that would become the Jazz Members Big Band.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, you used to play gigs when you were like 15, right? At the Ramada Inn or something. Didn't you have like a 5-night-a-week gig when you were in high school?
I talked my parents into letting me do that, yes.
That's great.
Yeah.
So it was like 5 nights a week, right?
It was 5 nights a week, and it was with an adult band of very good players, and they were serious about playing. It's a band that rehearsed. It was...
So you're playing 5 nights a week, and they rehearsed?
They would rehearse. We would rehearse sometimes on Sundays. Sometimes we would get there early, and they wouldn't open the doors, and we'd get a chance to rehearse. But it was a really solid group, and I learned a lot. And they were players who took a real genuine interest in me. I was so young and getting better, and helping me along. It was great.
But that's like something that you can't. That's not a taught thing. I mean, that's something you love doing, and then you're around players that are better than you probably, and you're learning from them. And that's just driving that, instilling that vibe right from the time you're in high school. So, I mean, it just continued on.
Well, it's yes. And as it turns out with that particular group, it was called the Billy Matea Quartet. Now, Billy Matea was a very talented musician from Joliet, Illinois. But he had spent a lot of time in Nevada and played Vegas for maybe a decade. And he had moved back and started a band and was going to put a gig together. And one of the players in the band was Roger DeWar, bass player. Brother of Ron.
I was going to ask, yeah.
Yes, younger brother of Ron. And we had been doing some playing together, and Roger came up with the idea of maybe having me audition and talking to Bill about me playing on this steady gig that they were going to get. And basically, Bill told me a couple things. First, when I showed up for the audition, he looked at me and he said, "How old are you?" And I told him I was 15. And he rolled his eyes and said, "What am I doing auditioning someone who's 15? And then he said, "Do your parents even know you're here?" he just had this very dismayed attitude.
What are you doing here?
Right, because I was 15 years old, and I'm sure I looked like I was this kid. We played together. We played some tunes. He liked what he heard. He said to me, "I can't believe I'm going to hire a 15-year-old person. I would like to talk with your mother or father, though, about doing this." He was serious. And I said, "Okay." And then he told me, before I left this audition and this little rehearsal, he said, "There's two things I want you to know." Or he says, "If you ever sound or act like you're 15, I'll fire you in a second."
That's great advice.
So playing was a very big deal. But I had some great teachers. My parents.
And you're making some serious money then too, right?
Right.
I mean, you're making 5-night-a-week gig money.
Yeah. No, it was something. I was making some money. I was playing the drums, and doing. That's what I wanted to do.
Yeah.
And it was wonderful. And still getting up for school. I mean, my father drove me to the gig and picked me up. I didn't have a driver's license yet.
So you're doing all that in high school and everything, and then you ended up going to U of I, and that's where you met everybody in the Jazz Members Big Band.
Well,
what was your reasoning for going to U of I? I mean, you probably could have just stayed in Chicago and kept playing.
Well, I mean, North Texas was a very viable place for me, and it's a place I was very serious about. And at the same time, Berkeley and Boston was. But I went to the University of Illinois Jazz Camp, Illinois Summer Youth Music. It's one of the oldest in the country. And when I went there, and the teachers that I came in contact with, and the sound of the band, and John Garvey leading this band, it was an incredible band. And the idea of going to school there might be something that I could be serious about. Well, I made the jazz band, the one band that was there. There were two bands, and I made the best band, which was thrilling. And in that band, the first year, was Eric Schneider on alto, Ed Peterson on tenor, Jeff Lindbergh on trombone, Steve Laspina on bass, who's gone to New York, was from this area.
Yeah.
It was this, Brian Sanders, who was a great jazz saxophone player, was there. And eventually, that would become the U of I Jazz Band, that group of people that would eventually become the Jazz Members Big Band. So we knew one another and started playing together when we were in high school. And that was the very beginning.
That's wild.
And that circle of people that I just named would eventually become the Jazz Members.
Yeah, that's wild. So when you come back up, we'll fast forward here. You guys are in the Jazz Members Big Band. You're playing, now you specifically, you're playing a ton of gigs outside of the big band, obviously. So what was your playing situation like? I mean, you came back up from U of I, you guys start this Jazz Members Big Band, but I mean, you're playing at the Showcase, you're playing all over, you're playing with all the top name dudes as they come in, because didn't you and Kelly and John, Kelly Sill, John Campbell, Joel, you guys were like the hot trio in town for a long time.
Well, that
right?
was, I mean, certainly a great thing that happened for me. I wasn't in town long. And John asked me to be in his trio. And at the time, I mean, John was a young lion on jazz piano in Chicago.
Yeah.
So he's a great player. I knew John from the Champaign days, but
he didn't go to school there, but he was down in that area.
He was brought up and living in Bloomington.
Yep.
And we did some playing together, but the idea of moving to Chicago and playing in John's trio was also an incredible chance for me, something that did happen. And because of that, that trio became an accompanist for many people that were traveling in and out of Chicago that were jazz players named jazz players. So the Jazz Showcase was certainly one of the first places we were able to work and establish ourselves. But also, I was telling somebody not so long ago, and I hadn't thought about this in years, the first major gig I got with a name person was with Bunky Green.
Oh,
so the great alto saxophonist from Chicago, I joined Bunky's band along with John. And those were some of our very first gigs, playing together, and learned a ton from Bunky.
Yeah.
So there was the Jazz Members Big Band, and that was great. And then we had the John Campbell Trio, and John was working with a number of people. So my experiences really widened through that. Really
Well,
expanded.
and back then, I mean, we're talking about like early '80s, right? I mean, that's really when. I mean, you were
Very
doing,
early 80s,
You were
yes.
doing like 5-night-a-week gigs, right? 5-6 night a week gigs. I mean, it wasn't like one here, one there. I mean, you guys were locked in a lot of times, weren't you?
Well, yeah, the music business was such that the 5-night-a-week gig was established. You could get that at the Hyatt O'Hare.
And you're playing jazz, like you're playing tunes, right?
Right. Those, I mean, there were Rush Street places, and you were playing jazz.
Yeah.
But I also started working, got a connection. I want to say this happened, Chuck LaPaglia, who eventually would own the Jazz Gallery in Milwaukee, heard me play, knew Joe Siegel. I believe he heard me at the Jazz Showcase. Eventually said, would you be interested in working at the Jazz Gallery in Milwaukee? Those are all 5-night-a-week gigs. So I worked with everyone from Chet Baker
Oh, wow.
to Dakota Staten to Barry Harris to Kenny Burrell to Sonny Stitt there.
Because they would come through and then
they
you
would
were
come
in the
through.
house band, right?
I was in the house band, so I
Yeah.
started working in Milwaukee.
Wow.
And so Chicago was very good to me, and I was learning a lot all the time.
And that's the kind of
I was in
learning that,
situations that were demanding.
yeah, that's where I was going with that. I mean, that's the kind of learning that you can't do in college. You can only be on a bandstand with a super heavy duty dude that is used to playing with his sound, his intensity every single night, and you better match it. Otherwise, everybody's going to know whose problem it is.
Yeah, it's,
know.
it's. I mean, the music business is that kind of business. You eventually, you most likely will get your chance. Then everyone will need to come across with the goods.
Yeah.
There's no question about that.
Yeah.
But that's the fun. That's the impetus. That's the motivation. That's the challenge. That's why I was so interested in playing as well. I wanted to be successful.
Yeah. Well, and you did a lot of touring too. I mean, you've done a lot of one-offs, obviously, but you were with Red Rodney. You were in Red Rodney's band, right at his last band, I think, right?
Pretty much so. And played with Red, well, for several years, but the last year or so, because he was using different drummers in different areas, but eventually Red did hire me and asked me to be in his band, and it was great. It was great. He was a wonderful person, and he's a great player. And Red was someone who always felt if you were right for his band, he would tell people, if you were to ask, in fact, once I asked Red, I said, so Red, how's everything feel? Is everything cool? And he went, well, what do you mean, is everything cool? I said, well, playing in your group these days, are you happy? You have any suggestions? He says, oh, no, I don't have any suggestions. I'm not a teacher. I don't teach anybody how to play. You come to me sounding the right way for my band, and then you're in my group. He said, oh, you had been gone a long time ago if that had been the case. I thought to myself, I hope I'm not reminding him about something that might be.
I was thinking about that. Thanks, Joel.
Now that you bring this up,
But Chris Potter was in that band, and Gary Dial,
well,
right?
eventually it was originally Dick Oates,
Okay.
lead alto player with the Vanguard Jazz Orchestra,
Yeah.
and playing with a number of people. But Dick Oates would be there, and Dick Oates would leave. And, Red Rodney would come. Red would end up coming up with Chris Potter, and Chris was 19 years old.
Yeah. You were like one of the first guys he toured with, I think. Well, you were in that group.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, this was, I think, his first professional tour, if I'm correct.
Yeah. 19. Yeah. So what did you guys think when you're sitting there and you're playing, you're like, oh, this kid, man, what is this?
Well, I have to say, and this is all in the best. Gary Dial was kind of the veteran of the sideman, and great piano player, and Red and he did work things out with the band, and Red found Chris, and now of course we would learn that he very, very much made the right decision.
Yeah.
But at first, Dial just said to Red, you hired a 19-year-old kid to play in the band? Just Jay Anderson was playing bass and Gary was playing piano, myself, and we were definitely in our mid-30s at this point. And so Chris came on the band, and I think it was our opening night. It was in Georgetown at a club there, and Chris sounded incredible. Within, I don't know, one chorus, we realized this kid sounds incredibly good. He sounds mature, just beyond his years. And then we'd find out personally, as a friend, a great person and mature beyond his years as well. Yeah. And of course, we know what has become of Chris, and no surprise to many of us.
Yeah.
He's an incredibly talented saxophonist and deserves everything.
Well, when you've been coming up and you've played with a lot of people now, what's sort of like your take when you walk in somewhere and you're playing with somebody at the showcase for 4 nights, or you're playing in Milwaukee, or you're playing somewhere, whatever, you play all over the place with different guys. You're in the house band. What's your approach? So if you're a young musician or even an older musician, you're watching this, how does Joel Spencer walk in? You know who this guy is. Let's say Benny Golson was on the Tonight Show last night, or on Stephen Colbert last night.
Oh my!
Yeah, he was in the house band last night. They were playing all Benny Golson tunes.
Good for him. It was
awesome, man.
Good for everybody who heard it.
Oh, it was great. But you've played with Benny before, so I mean, you walk in, it's Benny Golson, or it's Cedar Walton, or somebody like that. How do you approach that? You walk in, do you listen to tunes, or how does that work out?
Well, I think one thing is being in this is being aware of all great players, developing a great ear from listening to great recordings, and also having a very good idea of what genre, what era, what style they're based in. So that's a big part of it. If you get a chance to play with Cedar Walton, you should know Cedar is, of course, a great trio player. Cedar had some beautifully orchestrated trio arrangements, and Cedar was a powerful voice in Art Blakey and the Jazz Messengers. So you need to be familiar with Cedar in those ways and know where he's coming from and how you might approach his music in general stylistically. So, Red was bop. Red was post-bop.
Right.
So when you played with Red, for example, not to get too technical, but playing expanded ideas, playing over the bar line, perhaps interjecting ideas often, or being a part of his solo in that way of interjecting ideas in a very confident or strong manner, he might think, wait, you're an accompanist for me. I need someone who's back and supporting what I do, and you need to listen to me. Now, then the next week I could be with Dave Liebman. Now with Lieb, if I played the same way I played with Red, Lieb would say, you need to give me more. I need to hear more from you. And you need to get inside what I'm doing. Yeah. So Lieb would play, turn around, Dave Liebman, and take a break and look at you. He would incorporate you in his solo on the stand, not only musically but visually in giving you cues. Red wouldn't play that way. So sometimes for Red, if he were to play that way, he could easily think, this guy's not the right drummer for my band.
Right.
So getting to play with so many different people, my homework was just, I had to listen to them most likely a lot, but it was to understand where they were coming from stylistically, where they came from in the history of the music, and how did drummers play in that part, in that historical
Do you ever
time.
ask the artist, like if you get there and say, what kind of vibe are we talking about here? What do you listen for? Do you ever talk about that? Or
I never raised that question if it came up in a conversation naturally, but I think, being confident but knowing where someone's coming from, a lot of times being a good reader, you never know what someone's going to throw at you. And just being familiar with that person's music. If you know that person's music, you know that person.
Yeah.
And so I think a big part of it is that you're inside someone's music, you're comfortable there. But that's because you know it. You can't tell yourself you know it and then you don't. This isn't something you can talk yourself into either. You have to really know it for sure. And it might sound strange to say that, but when that person turns around and now the audience is there and you're playing a major club and they're looking at you and they're counting the tune off, this becomes quite a reality, actually.
It's going down, man, one way or the other.
Yes.
Have you ever been with an artist, you got some story that you were with an artist and you're playing it, you thought that this is the way he wanted to groove and do whatever, and then he kind of told you a little bit later and said, hey man, why don't you try this, or give you a suggestion, or is it just kind of like a known thing?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, one was Woody Shaw. I have a chance to play with Woody Shaw, and he just said to me, yeah, sound really good. Don't be so polite though. And I was being. I think I was being polite. I was staying out of his way, trying to be supportive. This was on our first opening night, on our first set. And he said that to me and just gave me the green light. Go ahead, be yourself and just play.
That's what you want to hear, too, right?
And that's what you want to hear.
Like,
no, everything was cool, but it was just like, oh, you know. And we're going to talk about Eddie Jefferson.
Yep.
One of the greatest lessons I ever had on a live gig was from Eddie Jefferson. And he talked to me about something that's important, and it's important for all young jazz drummers especially. And that is, how can you play a great feel, play in the pocket, play with intensity, but not accompanied with a loud dynamic. So a lot of times for drummers, someone might ask a young drummer to play softer. Sometimes the edge on the tempo wants to come back. It's almost a natural thing. But he said to me, let's keep our volume down. He said, I don't need quite the dynamic, and keep the edge on that tempo. Keep it on top. And that was a very valuable lesson, to understand that there is a very big difference in intensity. Rhythmic intensity does not mean dynamic intensity, as though you would play louder to create greater intensity. The fact, if we can play off of rhythmic intensity and be aware of that, that is incredibly intense. And it has nothing to do with whether it would be loud or not. It's the placement of the beat. So Eddie liked it right in the pocket with an edge, and that was exciting, and especially if we had somewhere to go dynamically.
Yeah.
So that's
if
something
you're playing all the way up here, there's nowhere else to go.
Right, there's nowhere else to go. But I think we almost and subconsciously can feel that loud means it's intense. Mm-hmm. And the whole dynamic range is important in playing great music. But some artists, they want that. I remember working got to work once with Freddie Hubbard for a weekend. And we played a couple tunes, and, this was great. He turned around and looked at us and says, oh, this is great. I don't need to tell you guys how to do anything. Just keep doing that.
Oh, really?
Yeah, what we're doing. That was Jim Trumpeter on piano, and Kelly Sill on bass, and myself on drums. So that was...
That's the green light right there.
That's the green light. That can happen as well.
Yeah.
I think... I tell young players all the time, you get to play with somebody who's got a name, they're really great, you're thrilled to be there, and then you might be waiting for them to say something. And might, I found out, when you play with somebody who's great, you play with any able musician, if they're not talking about the music, well, there's the answer. There is nothing wrong. So I think you only, talking about what happened and what should happen, then there, I guess, can be some concern.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, let's talk about Eddie Jefferson since you brought him up. I mean, you played on the last gig that he had, right? I mean, in Chicago, and then he went to Detroit, isn't that right?
His last gig would be in Detroit at Baker's Keyboard Lounge.
Man.
And this was 79, and it would have been May 6th, I believe, we did the recording. But we had a chance, and I think our date was April 30th. I was speaking to John Campbell this morning about this. It was April 30th, and we played with Eddie and Richie in Springfield.
Richie Cole.
Yes.
For everybody.
Alto saxophonist Richie Cole. And they had a group together and were traveling around the country. And at the time, there was a lot of buzz going on about Richie and Eddie and forming this new band. And they were starting to make all the major festivals. And it was a band that was, quote, climbing the ladder. Now, these guys had fame and notoriety before, but this new band and the two of them together were starting to get a lot of notoriety. So they came into the Midwest and picked up a rhythm section. Luckily for us,
it was you.
We would get to play with him, and we went to Springfield and played a night. I believe by then, via some folks, we were able to then play the Jazz Showcase. And as it would be, I think a teacher at UIC, Susan Markle, I believe she was a psychology teacher, if I have it right. She was doing some things where she had some sponsorship, and maybe public TV was connected, I'm not sure. Maybe a grant from UIC of recording some groups at the showcase, that is video presentation, filming.
Yeah, because Joe Siegel used to only record audio there.
Right.
And there was no video ever.
There was no
if you
video.
really look at some of the stuff for Joe Siegel, there's no video of it. There's pictures and things, but no video, yeah.
So there we ended up getting a video shoot, and we did it on the final night on a Sunday night on May 6th. And that band became a very good band overnight, the combination of us five.
Yeah.
And really understood one another. And I think we had a really great feel and understanding for where Eddie was going. And Susan came in and we did this tape. And I can remember at the time thinking, all of us, we felt so good about the energy and the performance level and the communication and thought, well, this is really good. And now Eddie is starting to think, well, would the three of you be interested in possibly becoming a band? We're starting to think about this as perhaps our group. There was some talk, there were some ramblings going on around this. And they then had another engagement the following week. And that would be in Detroit at Baker's Keyboard Lounge. I believe it was 4 nights. However, we had, and it's a good problem to have, we were working a venue in Champaign for 2 nights and then going to the Jazz Gallery in Milwaukee for 2 nights as a trio. These were good gigs. These were gigs that had a lot of advertisements going on.
Yeah, you
had a lot of press.
You couldn't sub out of them because they're your gigs.
We really couldn't, and we decided we just couldn't do it. And Eddie was very understanding. He said, you guys got gigs, you've made commitments, fine, we'll talk. Mm-hmm. Well, the short of it, and so incredibly sad, terrible, Eddie would go to Detroit and he would end up getting shot, standing on the street out in front of the club. And
is this somebody he knew? It was just random.
It's someone they would find out, and it was someone that he knew from years ago. Now, see, Eddie, years ago, besides developing as a singer, as I understood it, was a professional dancer.
Oh.
Was a tap dancer.
Yeah.
And this guy, supposedly, as the story goes, was a dancer also. And he approached Eddie, from what I've heard, about becoming part of his band as a dancer. And Eddie told him there was really no room for that. And this is how it ended up. Of course, it's, none of this makes sense.
No.
And I remember getting a call from John on the I think Sunday morning, and we did our gig in Champaign, and now it was time, I think, leaving on that Sunday, if I have it right, to go to Milwaukee. And he just said, I have some just terrible, awful news. You're not going to believe this. John's mom heard it on the news.
Oh, wow.
And so, we were...
Yeah, unbelievable.
Or in fact, no, I take that back. That was after our Friday night performance. We heard that the next day, Saturday, dedicated our Saturday night gig at Mabel's. That's the club we were playing in Champaign, to Eddie.
Yeah. Wow.
I believe that's how that took place.
Man,
but it was intense. I mean...
And that video is still up on YouTube. I think if they do searches for Eddie
Jefferson,
right?
as it turns out, there's a little story behind that video. We're not sure how this happened. John Campbell and I were discussing this afternoon. Not to go into great detail, but the tape was made. I'm not sure exactly where it was shown at first. Perhaps it was shown on public TV, maybe in arts department at UIC, maybe at our jazz fair that we used to have.
Used to have a jazz fair, yeah.
And so on and so forth. And then at some point, unbeknownst to us, there's a company who put this out, Rhapsody Films, and they put it out.
Well, the whole thing's out.
Yes, and it's out, selling on the market all over the world, and it's been on DVD for quite some time.
Wow.
However, this isn't something we were a part of, unfortunately. That is the next step in actually having it released. We'll leave it there.
So you don't have a jazz playing because of all the residuals?
Yeah, right, all the tremendous residuals. Unfortunately.
There's probably been a couple of those recordings that you don't quite cut the residuals from that.
But you can still purchase this. And it's the only video, the only film of Eddie Jefferson in performance. It's the only film.
Wow.
And we were on it, and
that's the old Jazz Showcase. So
that's
it'd be really
Jazz
cool
Showcase
to see it just because of the Jazz
Rush
Showcase
Street.
thing. Yeah.
What, is it Rush and Walton?
Yep.
Downstairs from the Happy Medium.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was my favorite jazz showcase.
I like the Blackstone too.
Yes.
I like the Blackstone. I was never at the one on
You
Rush,
like them
but I was
all,
at the
but
Blackstone.
that
yeah.
was something about kind of Chicago's version of the Vanguard.
Yeah.
Somehow.
Yeah.
For,
Oh, yeah.
obviously the design, but
well, that's wild. I mean, and the fact that it's recorded though, so people can see what the Jazz Showcase looked like, and that's got to be great for you for a historical standpoint, just to be able to have that.
Oh.
I mean, it's,
yes, I mean there we were, and we were all in our very early 20s,
Yeah.
and it's one of our first professional appearances and playing the Jazz Showcase, and it would be filmed.
Yeah. Oh,
And it's still there. So, I mean, it's terrific. It's terrific to be associated with those folks. And, of course, who knows what would have happened. We did have a strong feeling, perhaps, that we would be touring with Eddie. That's how we were starting to feel at that point.
Yeah.
It seemed that everything was fitting that well.
With everything you did, why didn't you move to New York? You just stayed in Chicago. I mean, you were getting a lot of calls from New York guys and stuff. Why
Well,
didn't you?
it seemed like between the showcase, between Rick's Cafe Americana eventually, between George's down on Kenzie and Franklin, and eventually studio work, a lot of great things and a lot of great opportunities happened right here. And as many times as I thought I would move to New York, and I do miss the fact, and I feel my experience would have been good. Of course, I do wish that I had moved to New York. I love Chicago, but I wish that I would have had that experience. But I got to play with those New York players here, and as a result of my experience here, I got many calls to go out and do road work and play out of town with those folks
Yeah.
as well. So,
Which is really kind of like when you're in New York and you're living in New York, you're playing some gigs. Really, you make your money when you go out on the road in
Yes.
New York. I mean, you're not making money in New York, really. You're out on the road in New York. You're meeting people in New York.
exactly.
So you made all the connections.
I did, and eventually would do some, various recordings. I was lucky to be on a recording with Joe Henderson, and lucky to be on a recording with John Campbell along with Clark Terry.
Yeah.
And those are kind of New York-bound sessions that, being in Chicago, I found myself on that are worth mentioning.
Yeah.
But I guess there's a part of me that wishes I would have moved to New York for that experience. I had visited New York just countless times. I would spend a lot of time out there, just depending.
Yeah.
One of my first long gigs out there was with Grover Mitchell and the Basie Band. Grover Mitchell, the trombonist, leading the band, and that was at the Rainbow Grill.
So you
in
played
New
with the
York.
Basie Band there?
And that lasted for 3 weeks, 6 nights a
Wow.
week. So that was an absolute thrill to gaze out that window and look at the skyline
Yeah.
and get to play that beat with those guys. That felt good. I remember on Saturday night, the instructions were be sure you get here early. There'll be a huge line because of Saturday Night Live.
Oh,
yeah.
yeah.
In the Rockefeller Center. So
They
it was
never-
very exciting.
They never had you on Saturday Night Live, though?
I didn't. I'm not sure why.
I don't know either. They totally missed the opportunity.
Yeah,
you were in the building.
Oh, yeah.
So now you made full circle now. Now you're back teaching at University of Illinois.
Yes, I would start at the University of Illinois. I would leave there in 1978 and decide to go out and try to make a living as a musician and become a known drummer. And I went out and did so, and it has been absolutely great. And as it would be, probably, we're talking early 2000s, 2001, I was done teaching private students.
Yeah.
I'd done a bit of classroom teaching now and then, would be hired to do a lecture, could be a history lecture, or do a master class on drumming, and so on and so forth. But I had an offer to start teaching at Northwestern University. That was 2001. Don Owens was head of the program. Mike Coker was on board.
And when you got out of U of I, you got a master's in education, right? Or
I
is it
had
a bachelor's?
I got a bachelor's in music education, and it wouldn't be till sometime later I would go back and finish my master's.
Oh, okay.
I did.
But I think
go in-
that's important for people to know because it's not like you left school and went. I mean, you actually got a K through 12 certification. I remember you telling
Yes.
me about student teaching and everything. I mean,
Well, you know,
you
at
did
that
the
time
whole
it was an
9 yards,
attempt
you know?
for someone who wanted to be a jazz artist to have another side,
Yeah.
for versatility in what you did in your craft. So that meant a lot to me. And got to Northwestern and basically had a 50, 60% position. Eventually I would be full-time. And then in 2008 would leave Northwestern. Things would change there. And out of teaching for a while, back to teaching at UIC in 2010.
That's right. I forgot you were at UIC.
I was at UIC as a history lecturer and leading the jazz band, and found out there was an opening at the U of I in Champaign, Urbana. And I'd audition and thrilled to be granted the position. And I've been there since fall of 2012.
Yeah, and your wife teaches there too.
Right, Joan teaches in Champaign
Joan
as well.
Hickey. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So so you're back. You're teaching. You love it down there, and you're spending time down
Yeah,
there.
it's where I started, and there was so much inspiration from that program and those people. And once again, the foundation of the Jazz Members Big Band, and to be back there teaching, there's something that feels really great about it.
Isn't that wild?
Yeah.
It's wild. And now you're doing the 40th anniversary of the Chicago Jazz Orchestra
That's
/
right.
the Jazz Members Big Band.
Gosh.
You're not that old though.
Oh,
Don't worry.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you.
Let me give everybody the details here. So all the information, May 18th, Joel is going to be playing with the band. John Campbell's back playing in the rhythm section as well, along with Marquise Hill, Alan Harris, Dee Alexander. Paul Marinaro is going to stop by and sing as well. I mean, what a band. It's going to be at the Studebaker Theater, 410 South Michigan Avenue, Chicago, Illinois, 7:30 p.m. to 9:30 p.m. All the information at chicagojazzorchestra.org. Joel, thanks so much for coming in, man. Of course, they can get information on Joel at spencerdrums.com, and you're on the University of Illinois music page as well. They can
That's
contact
correct.
you through that.
School of Music website at U of I. Yep.
And we're going to have Joel back on. We're going to do a feature interview because we didn't even cover half of the stuff that we could talk about. We didn't even talk Gold Star Sardine Bar. That's like 2 hours right there. Minimum 2 hours
Minimum.
right there.
There's some things that happen.
So you'll have to watch the feature that'll come out in the fall. But Joel, thanks for stopping by.
My pleasure, Mike, as always.
Glad you enjoyed Johnny O's. Now we're going to eat some hot dogs and some French fries here and get healthy for the afternoon.
Twist my arm.
All right, and of course, everybody, thanks for watching. Hopefully, Joel will see you on May 18th. Hopefully, I will see you somewhere. But if either one of us don't see you May 18th, hopefully, we will see you somewhere out on the scene.